Welcome to the Job Crafting Panel event. My name's Ryan Tamasebi. I'm the Director of People Science at Hive. We're delighted to be sponsoring this event and supporting this event and celebrating the launch of Rob Baker's book, Personalisation at Work, which is all about job crafting. I think at Hive, we support organisations to kind of gain better feedback and that better two-way communication from employer and employee. So really giving employees the opportunity to talk more about how they're feeling about work, how they're perceiving work, and what their opinions are, and any kind of honest and constructive suggestions and feedback they have for an organisation about how they can improve the employee experience. So really encouraging organisations to put that trust and give that responsibility and ownership to individual employees to think about how their own experience of work can be improved. And I think that's what we're so kind of keen about when we're looking at job crafting and learning more about job crafting, why we're delighted to support this event today, because it feels like this is another opportunity for us to give more trust and more responsibility and ownership to the individual to tell us about how they can thrive at work, how they can bring their best self to work. And of course, that's going to benefit the businesses that they work for as well. So absolutely delighted to be a part of it. I'll really quickly introduce the panel before we get going. So we have Rob Baker, who is the author of the book, Personalisation at Work. So Rob's really passionate about job crafting, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about what job crafting is and what the opportunities for organisations are. We have Julia Smith. So Jules is a great friend of mine. She's worked in some very senior HR roles for the likes of Virgin Money, GE, and most recently Sodexo, and she's the founder of People Science Consulting. So she's all about helping organisations create better cultures and better workplace for their people. We have Andrew Dodman, who's the Chief People Officer at Leeds City Council. So Andrew's going to be able to give us some of that real kind of leadership perspective, particularly from an HR leadership perspective of how job crafting can benefit an organisation, and also what it's like to actually start trying to introduce this as part of an HR strategy. We have Sarah Dewar, who's the People Director for Connect Health. So again, Sarah's really keen on job crafting and can offer us some of that practitioner perspective and give you guys some guidance as to how you can start to introduce this inside your organisation. And we have Vicky Elsey as well. So Vicky was and still is the lead of the MSc in Occupational Psychology at Northumbria University. So I had the pleasure of being taught by Vicky way back when I did my Masters, and it's kind of surreal to now be sitting on facilitating a panel that she's on as an attendee. Who would have thought? So Vicky will be able to give us that academic perspective and what the research tells us about job crafting. So I guess without further ado, we'll go straight to Rob as the author of the book. And Rob, if you could tell us a little bit about why you're so passionate about job crafting, what job crafting is for those who aren't familiar with it, and what you believe it can offer in terms of the ability to change the future of work.
Great, a big question then to start with. So first of all, say thank you so much everyone for tuning in, and thanks very much for Hive and Ryan for kind of hosting today's session. So I would love to have seen everyone in person, but that hasn't happened. But one of the great things about that is that we've been able to offer this out to a much bigger audience, and we've got up to kind of 200 people I think sign up, and will be joining us from across the world today, which is awesome. And I'm really chuffed about that, to be exploring something I'm so deeply passionate about. And so why am I passionate about this? Why did I write the book Personalisation at Work? And I strongly believe that personalisation is the missing piece in the puzzle when it comes to performance, well-being, and engagement that HR and leaders are looking for within organisations. We personalise all aspects of our lives, our cars, our clothes. We face 100 different choices when we get to the coffee shop in terms of how we want our perfect coffee. But one of the areas that we don't often get encouraged to personalise is the world of work. If you look at personalisation, kind of when we personalise something, we tend to value it up to 2 times as much as something that we're given, that comes off the shelf, that's a generic kind of product or service. And similarly, researchers have found that when we use personalised items, such as a personalised pen to complete anagram tasks, or personalised kind of golf putters or rackets or darts, you name it, we perform better in these tasks as well. So personalisation gives you not only an increased value of how you perceive something, but also enables you to perform better using that as well. And that's kind of backed up time and time again by research. And when I kind of found this out, I was really curious about, well, we know this in all other aspects of our life. Why aren't we applying this to work? And there's lots of reasons kind of for that. But I think, and this is something we'll explore with the panel, I love everyone's views on this, but in part, I think it's around that we're not we've designed work and built work in a situation where we've told people what to do. We were in a very controlling way, and rather than maybe tapping into the talents and the wide experiences that we have within the employees that work for us. So I was intrigued about how could we bring this personalization to work, to bring the personal touch to work. And the most compelling way to do this is through a concept called job crafting. And job crafting, it's been kind of really well kind of known within academic and research circles, and I'm sure Vicky will kind of mention this. So we've had up to 140 kind of papers written about this, but for some reason it hasn't translated into practice. And the purpose of writing the book, from my perspective, was actually to kind of share this with HR leaders and people who are interested about making work experiences better for employees and to increase performance at an organizational perspective. I was really interested about how you can raise awareness about job crafting and how you can actually bring it to life. And so what is job crafting? And job crafting effectively is encouraging people to personalize work, proactively personalize work to make it a better fit to their individual strengths, their passions, their interests. So people can personalize their tasks, they can personalize their relationships, they can personalize how they think about the value of their work. And we know that when people take these proactive steps, when they personalize their work, they feel higher sense of satisfaction, engagement, and happiness in terms of what they do, and they perform better as well. So that's the kind of job crafting in a nutshell, and why I think it's important.
And it sounds like, in a way, kind of common sense, doesn't it? That if you're able to personalize something and you're able to make it fit with what interests and what motivates you, then you're more likely to be engaged and you're more likely to thrive. So I guess, Vicky, I will kind of come to you at that point to say, kind of what does the academic research tell us before we kind of look at from a practitioner and an HR leadership point of view? Let's start with the research then. What does the research tell us about the impact that job crafting can have on individuals?
Yeah, I mean, the research is interesting because, as Rob says, there's quite a bit and it hasn't really translated into practice. Although I'm not sure how easy it is to make that claim because it's quite difficult often to research what people are actually doing every day at work. I think people job craft for all sorts of reasons, and that's what the literature is sort of trying to identify. And it's one of those concepts that's emerged from practice. It's not a theory that's developed that somebody said, let's all go and job craft. It's kind of, what is it that helps some individuals to feel more engaged or happier at work that's different from others? And the research suggested that it was this concept that's been called job crafting. So people are doing things like improving relationships or seeking out different relationships. They're looking at ways of asking for more complex tasks or reducing challenging demands at work. And all of these things that they're doing is helping them to feel happier, more productive, more engaged. And I guess as Rob says, it's kind of unlocking some of those complex areas or the wicked problems in the workplace that we're trying to really understand a little bit more. You know, why is it that some people are more engaged than others? And I think job crafting is one of those things that can help. I think it was about 140 papers you were saying, Rob, is that right? And we've talked a lot at length about these papers in various contexts. Quite geeky, I think, a little bit sometimes, Rob, aren't we, when we get together talking about job crafting. But the research literature is emerging. I wouldn't say it's a panacea for all kind of workplace problems. And I wouldn't say that it's something that managers can just tell people to do. It's a bottom-up process. It's things that individuals do by themselves, not something that they're told to do by their managers. Because that's different. That's job redesign. That's changing the way things are developed or designed in the workplace. But it is something that is simple for individuals to do, and it's important for organizations to create the environment in which they can do that. So the right culture, a culture of trust and support rather than a sort of command and control culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if from an academic perspective then, and from an educational point of view, I mean, I often look at things like, you know, we're talking about making big changes to the way of the world when it comes to work. And often one big way to do that is to change kind of mindset and change expectations about what work should look and feel like. So I guess a big opportunity to do that is through education. And so people will have this idea of, you know, you come out of the education system and then you look and you apply for jobs and, you know, you'll look for a job description and you know, apply for it and try and kind of sell yourself and how your skills and qualities will help you to succeed. I guess for what I'm interested in then is kind of given all of this research, Vicky, in something like an MSc program, would we be looking to do that with students in terms of talking to them more about job crafting and almost kind of changing their expectations of what work should be like? So almost that the pressure's coming kind of bottom up side organizations as well, and people are almost demanding organizations start to think about this differently, because without that, are we putting all the expectation on HR leaders and business leaders who've kind of have a more ingrained mindset? They're going to be more likely to be quite habitual in terms of how they approach work, and that actually putting all of it on them to change it. So do we need to look at coming at it from both sides?
I think so, and I think that's what a bottom-up process is really. It's about people asking for it or doing it anyway. So rather than asking for permission, it's asking for forgiveness sometimes, isn't it? Well, I did this, and look at the outcome that I had, and it's a great outcome, isn't it? I mean, I certainly teach job crafting. Rob came along and helped me to teach job crafting to our students last year. And it's a concept that I've presented at conference about to get people to think differently. My husband manages a team of engineers, and often what we talk about is, well, how can you create the environment so that people can do these things? But I think you're right, the pressure's got to come from within rather than people saying, or managers saying, do this, or HR saying, encourage your team to do this. It's got to be, encourage your team to do this, and your team have to want to do it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew, then from a organizational perspective, and I guess if I was to think about the type of organization that would really quickly run with job crafting right across their entire business, I would be thinking of maybe new tech startups, the likes of Hive, kind of small SMEs that can perhaps be a little bit more fluid, and it's easier for them to introduce new ways of working and go with the latest thinking. So a council or a public sector organization where it's perhaps a little bit more difficult, or it's more of a challenge to introduce some of these types of changes. Can you share with us how you've come at that from a kind of a leadership perspective, and how you've been able to introduce this into your strategy there?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ryan. As you rightly say, Leeds City Council is a large public sector organisation. So we have about 28,000 staff working right across the city in a whole range of different roles. So obviously it's not that normal, agile, small type of organisation. I'll say a little bit about our strategy and the work that we're doing, but can I just start by saying that I'm really pleased to talk to people about something that's not about COVID-19. The last 4 weeks I've talked about nothing other than face masks and antigen testing and vulnerable groups. So if I do drift into those issues, and apologies. So you are right, that really where we started, Ryan, is thinking very much about the role of HR leadership and the strategy that we wanted for our 28,000 staff across the organisation. Because we're very mindful as HR leaders, of course, that we often say very openly and very clearly that staff obviously do play a key role in any organisation's success. We know about that causal relationship between staff commitment and staff productivity and organisational outcomes. And HR people are very happy to talk about people being the most important asset in an organisation, and that's where the competitive advantage is. But really where we came at that is we tried to challenge some of our thinking a little bit around this, because part of the things that we were very mindful about is that often what we do is when we think about how we actually apply that and how we work with and engage staff, we are very mindful that often the things that we do tend to be done to people rather than with people. So it's going back to what Vicky said really about that bottom up rather than top down. So a lot of HR activity we are still doing, to be fair, but also we're trying to challenge is, as I say, being done to people. So we are very common and frequently tell people how to do their jobs in terms of their job descriptions, how to do tasks. We tell people where they work and what hours of work they should do. We also explain and tell people what jobs and grading to go and what their career structure should be. And particularly HR leaders are really good at developing a robust framework around the workforce in terms of the strategy, the plans, the policies, the procedures, you name it. And increasingly over the last few years, we're very familiar with telling people even what kind of culture and values and competencies. But of course, the problem with all of that, that's still really talking about an organisation, its processes, its mechanics, and not really about the individual. And we were really trying to think very much about the role of the individual. And back to what Vicky and Rob have said, is recognising that if you actually enable people to have a bit of trust, a bit of choice over how they develop and frame their own roles, their own tasks, rather than being told, then they may actually frame it and craft it in a slightly different way. And then we would hope indirectly that people will flourish, they'll thrive, and then you gain that kind of performance and that kind of commitment that everybody in the HR community wants. I think the particular practical issues that we were trying to face within the council is that we were also really mindful, Ryan, that people's expectations of the work place is changing quite rapidly. So we had to adapt quite quickly and thoughtfully to that. So our staff are demanding more choice in their role, more flexibility, different skills, wanted to move around into different roles quite quickly. So we had to sort of shift away from that strong demarcated structured approach that perhaps we're more familiar with. And also the other big challenge that we were facing is that the skills that we as an organisation were needing from our staff were rapidly changing. So we know quite a lot about the impact of digitalisation in the workplace, and this is creating a whole range of different types of jobs, and jobs were having to be done very differently, in the speed that they were needed. So what we took the view was that we couldn't anymore just rely on managers or HR professionals to control and manage that on the top-down approach, as Vicky said earlier. The only way you could really embrace that kind of ambiguity, that pace of change, was enable individuals to take more choice and actually lead some of that change within the workplace themselves. So that's how we started our thinking and our thought processes around personalisation and job crafting.
Great. So I know you mentioned that you're delighted to be having a conversation about something today other than COVID-19. However, I was going to ask you, and I'm seeing some great questions coming through in the chat box, as I'm sure you all are. There are a lot of people kind of asking here about how, what the potential is for job crafting to actually benefit employees and organisations during this time. So have you found that as you've had to kind of respond to this crisis, that actually having job crafting is inside your organisation, is it been helping? Has it been helping individuals with terms of how they're structuring the work?
Absolutely, Ryan. It's a really interesting dynamic we're playing out now, and it's obviously fairly early days, but actually the crisis that we're facing now has really almost forced us to fast track that kind of personalisation approach. So as an organisation, we've had large volumes of staff who have been displaced because of closures in services. So thousands of staff are no longer able to do the jobs they were originally doing. Likewise, other bits of the services are under huge amounts of pressure because of sickness absence or increase in volume of activity. So what we've had to do really quickly is find creative ways of deploying large amounts of resource from one bits of the organisation to another. And we've actually been able to adopt some of those job crafting principles to help us to do that. So we've been able to work with staff and invite them to comment and share with us what their talents or their passions, what their interests are, and how we can then apply that into those other jobs across the organisation. Whereas perhaps previously what you would have done is just picked up teams and then just slotted them in or forced them in en masse. But actually we've been able to do that through a dialogue. We've actually created what we call a skills questionnaire, where people have actually set out what interests them, what they would like to try to do differently during this crisis. So we've had to respond and deliver service delivery, particularly our frontline mission critical services. But interestingly, we've still been able to do it in a way that has enabled people to try something different and take opportunities that perhaps ordinarily they wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So then that kind of opportunity can come out of crisis in terms of people being able to try new things, but also that flexibility kind of leads to the resilience of how the organisation can get through this as well. I think that's really interesting. I'll bring in Jules and Sarah at this point to talk more about, again, the practitioner perspective on this and some of the benefits that you've noticed when you've introduced job crafting inside the organisations you've worked with. So Jules, if I come to you first and just ask from a practitioner perspective inside the workplaces you've introduced this, how have you initiated that and what have the benefits been and what does it actually kind of look like from a practical point of view?
Yeah, so I started talking to Rob about job crafting when I was at Virgin Money, and I had responsibility for employee engagement, and we enjoyed really high levels of engagement. Actually, it was we had an engagement score of around 79–80%. And as we all know, you don't achieve engagement and move on, do you? It's perpetual. And actually, it gets harder to sustain. So we were looking for really creative, innovative ways to keep our people engaged, but with some specific focus. We knew there was something in a personalised employee experience. We didn't quite know what that was. So actually talking to Rob illuminated that for us. We had a really impactful, ambitious diversity and inclusion agenda, and the concept of bringing your whole self to work. And that sort of, you know, chimed true as well in talking to Rob about job crafting. We knew that a couple of the areas of the company we weren't doing as well as we could in terms of development, and particularly in our contact centre group, the levels of loving your job were slightly relatively lower. And I can see on the chat there's been a few questions around how could job crafting work for those people who perhaps have less autonomy and more prescription in their daily work. And so for us, we decided to pilot job crafting in two parts of the business. One was to really test it out in the contact centre for the very reason that those questions are coming up, because, you know, how really, if you have to log on and answer incoming calls all day and process applications, actually how much scope do you have to job craft? So we wanted to really test it out with our contact centre folks. And we also had a really forward-thinking CIO, the guy that ran our IT team. He was just very curious about, he really wanted to drive engagement in his organisation, but he was very curious about it as well. So we piloted it. And I think there was Rob came in and he did workshops with the team, and we did a before and after, and the data really speaks for itself, right, Rob? I mean, I think in both functions, I think it was in the high 90s, 97, 98% said that people would benefit personally and professionally from job crafting. I think it was in the mid to high 80s that people had had the opportunity to craft. And job satisfaction increased, I think, like in the mid-30s by 34%. And that was way beyond we could ever anticipate. But I think, you know, data, I mean, those of you that know me know that I love data, right? So the data is really important. But you know what was really powerful for me was the stories that came out of it. And I'll share one, because I think this story, and there are hundreds of stories that Sarah, Andy, myself, we can all share. But this one really demonstrates to me not just the to from data points, but actually the more subtle advantages and changes that come about. So we had somebody in our mortgage application team, and she was a real stickler for order. And having gone through the job crafting workshop, she set herself a job crafting goal that when she had a customer come in, the notes on the system used to drive her absolutely mad. That the notes were all over the place. She'd have to go back through the history with the customer to get a feel for what the customer actually needed and what experience it had. So part of her job crafting goal was just to spend a small 30 seconds of her time at the end of that customer call tidying up those notes. Not a huge change, but it was something that was important to her. She had a skill in it because she was very structured, very ordered, very organized. It was, you know, one of her strengths. And she came back and she told us this story. And what occurred to me was, not only does she feel better about work and she's done something and doing something that's playing to her strengths and her skills, but the next colleague who speaks to that customer will feel the benefit of that because the notes are ordered. The customer will feel the benefit of that because that person's not having to go through the whole history again. So, so it was the story. It was really, for me, it was all the stories that brought this to life. And I think in terms of the data points, absolutely. But you know, the more I talk, the more I'll talk about. It's the stories that are really, really powerful when it comes to job crafting.
So with the job crafting, then, is it as much about understanding the strengths and skills of others and how you would engage with other people inside your team and other teams and departments, as well as understanding your own? So you know how to craft a better job for yourself so that you can thrive, but you also understand who else in your team is going to thrive doing other aspects as well. So that kind of collaboration and the conversations and the stories that are being shared are more powerful? Or is this very much about you as an individual, and the other individuals in your team will worry about themselves?
I mean, from my experience, we saw a huge, I think that was a unintended side effect, positive side effect for us. We definitely saw, as people shared their stories, like, okay, right, okay, so you enjoy taking meeting notes. Well, that's fine. We hate taking them. So there's a bit of task crafting for you and a bit of task crafting for me. So it was a bit of an unintended. We weren't expecting that, but we definitely saw that as well.
Right. So Sarah, last but not least, I know you've kind of listening, soaking all this up, and you'll have seen some of the questions coming through in the chat as well. So I guess it'd be great if you could kind of build on what Jules has offered so far in terms of, from a practitioner point of view, introducing this inside places where you've worked. But I guess one of the questions, and a couple of the questions which have been coming through, have been about the idea of different people doing different roles. So from your experience, have you found it easier to introduce job crafting within some roles than others? Or tell us a little bit about how you kind of experienced this.
Yeah, so our job crafting journey started when we were thinking about reviewing our performance management system. So we had a traditional performance management system with annual objectives, mid-year reviews, etc. We knew we wanted to change that to a quarterly meaningful conversation approach, but we wanted to have something to base that on. And on discussion with Rob, job crafting seemed to fit really nicely with our performance management approach. But we knew it was something that was completely different to managers, and we couldn't say, just go out and do some job crafting. They didn't know what it was, they didn't understand. And I think their initial perception was it's about people taking the parts of the job that they like and doing more of them than not doing the other parts. So we built 4 job crafting activities that would take place over each quarter of the year, based on career and development, well-being, relationships and feedback, and then on to reward and recognition, to give a bit of a framework for the conversation to do it. And ran plenty of sessions for managers to give them the skills that they needed to job craft. It wasn't necessarily easy. A lot of managers were sort of saying, well, this is an extra thing, we don't have time to job craft, we've got too much other work to be doing. But Rob and I talked a lot about it being small changes, and it's not necessarily about doing your job, doing different tasks. It might be about reframing how you do your job, or thinking about how you do things differently to be more effective as well.
I guess the manager thing, it's inevitable when we have any conversation about aspects of employee experience or culture, we'll start talking about managers. And again, some of the chat messages coming through are asking about how do we equip managers with the skills to have really great conversations with their teams and individuals within their teams about job crafting. So I imagine, this is new for a lot of practitioners. It's going to be really new and potentially quite scary for people managers. The same way it can be with things like employee engagement data and the work and the support and the coaching we try to give managers about how to have better conversations about well-being and engagement and how people are feeling. So have you got anything you can share with us around what work you've done with managers to give them that confidence and that framework so they can have better conversations within their teams?
Yeah, I mean, we've run face-to-face and remote sessions on how to do this, but what we found effective is having that framework of conversation. So giving managers a set of exploratory questions. It's not a tick list, it's not a script, but giving them that basis. So asking them things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how challenged do you feel in your role? Talking about challenging relationships. Giving them something to base that conversation on was really quite helpful. Rob and I also did each quarter a recording podcast, whatever you want to call it, where Rob and I had a conversation about how to be effective and some of the things to look out for.
No, absolutely. And I guess, Rob, it'd be great at this point, and again, a lot of people are asking about, what a job crafting workshop would look like, what these conversations would actually kind of entail. So can I bring you back in at this point to just tell us a little bit about, you let's say perhaps you're introduced to an organization who are open to learning more about job crafting. They don't have any idea where to start. And there's a little bit of skepticism as well across parts of the organization about, whether this should be introduced. Well, how would you go about that? What would your starting point be?
Well, I think the starting point is the fact if there's skepticism, that's great because people are actually engaged with the concepts and they're going to be curious. And so actually I welcome kind of skeptics. I welcome people to be kind of curious about testing whether this works. And I think Jules and Sarah have both mentioned this in both those organisations we worked. We tested this first to see if it did work with an organisational cultural fit. We've been very lucky in terms of the work that I've done, is that it has worked in the majority of cultures in environments, but it's always worth to kind of test that. But in terms of the practicalities of it, in terms of actually what a workshop would entail, it's very much around actually exploring and sharing the concept to a certain extent. So getting people to understand actually maybe the benefits of shaping and personalising their role, but also getting people to reflect on maybe when they've done this already. So a lot of us would intuitively have been we'll make changes on how we approach our job, how we do certain tasks that taps into the things that we're interested in. But we'll do it maybe not deliberately, not with purpose, and not with kind of deliberate action and proactivity. And so what I do within the workshops very often is just get people to reflect on actually when in the past have they done projects or initiative or something that they're really proud of or happy about, or a memory about a piece of work that they're really engaged with. And the chances are there will be some element of that where they've used something they're good at, so they'll have had some opportunity to kind of shape that task, you know, in some way, and they'll understand the value of it. So they'll recognise the kind of contribution to someone else in terms of having completed that task. So we'll get people just to explore when it's happened in the past. And then it's a case of saying, okay, reflecting on that, and reflecting on maybe how you look at your task, kind of your job currently. What are the opportunities for you to experiment? And again, I approach this very much as an experiment in terms of actually making a small change. And I think Jules and Sarah both talked about this idea of making a small change. I find through a happy accident, actually, through the workshops I've done, but this is supported by research that I've undertaken, that the majority of job crafting activity that people do actually takes 10 minutes a day to an hour a week. So it's small stuff. And if people approach and try and find small changes they can make, which are saying 10 minutes or an hour a week, they're more likely to be successful in terms of actually making that task. And that's why you get the stats that Jules said, which is like 98 people could have felt this is useful, and 88% of people actually applied job crafting when they set a job crafting goal, which is more than say 25 to 30% you'd normally find from kind of workshops. So it's setting a kind of clear goal, and framing it and being deliberate in terms of why you're doing it. So in terms of what are you trying to get out of that, and what are the benefits you're trying to see? What would it look like if you were doing more of that role? And one thing maybe to mention as well, in terms of job crafting, is that there's different themes of job crafting. So we've talked about tasks, but other ways that people talk about job crafting is around your relationships. So in terms of actually checking into and thinking about how you connect with other people and how you can maybe amplify the relationships that matter to you. There's the purpose, so it's actually reflecting on how you see the value of your work and how it aligns to your personal sense of values. There's skills, so in terms of actually finding opportunities to develop your skills and knowledge in certain areas, or refine or consolidate your knowledge and skills in certain areas. And there's wellbeing crafting. So wellbeing crafting is finding ways to make your job healthier from a mental and physical perspective. So that could be, you know, eating healthier, there could be being more active, but it could also be mindful of actually your working hours and thinking about your, you know, when you leave the office, hey, do you remember those times when we left the office? And when you leave the office, or when you could have checking your emails, and even being more deliberate about that in terms of well-being. So in terms of the workshops, I generally explore those different themes and get people to say which of these is the one that you want to explore today. So again, it's around creating. I think everyone said in the panel, this can't be done to someone. You've got to create the environment when you're inviting someone to do this. So effectively, you're saying, this is the information. We actively encourage you to do this. Think about something that matters to you, and then just do it. And then getting people to come back and explore these things in a week or a couple of weeks later, that then gives people an opportunity to reflect how they've got on, but also share these stories that Jules mentioned and Sarah's kind of mentioned as well. People are nosy and curious about how other people are making their jobs better, and sharing tips about how they've made it successful and things that they found work really well. So some people, for example, may find that if they do their job crafting goal first thing in the day, they're more likely to achieve it than doing it last thing at the night. But it's different for different people. Job crafting comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, just like people, and it's around finding people to make those changes.
And the focus on well-being is hugely important. You know, lots of organisations have been trying to do a lot more around health and well-being for a long time. It's becoming even more kind of relevant and prevalent now. Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more quickly about the conversations that you've been having around well-being with people inside the organisation, and picking up on what Rob mentioned there about well-being crafting?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I guess, to touch on a couple of the questions that have come through. So we're an independent healthcare provider. So we are part of the NHS family. So we have a large clinician workforce. So I'm happy to talk to anyone about that aspect of things, because from an NHS and clinician perspective, it's been very well received and very well taken up. And our recent survey with our NHS colleagues has come across incredibly positively. So just wanted to pick up on that. I guess from a point of wellbeing, we've been talking about small things that people can do to really improve their mental health and physical health at work, from small changes to going out for a walk at lunchtime, to thinking about how people can reshape their working day. You know, do you take an hour every day to work from home and deal with whatever it is you need to do before you come into work? How can you think about shaping up that traditional working day to get what you need out of it from a wellbeing perspective? A lot of our managers were really nervous about starting to have wellbeing conversations. You know, what if something big comes out? What if there's a huge issue that then appears? And we think that's fine. You know, maybe that goes beyond job crafting, but it's really important to explore wellbeing. And actually, our recent survey of colleagues shows a real improvement in how people feel valued as a person, not just for the tasks that they do, but definitely small changes on wellbeing.
That's really interesting, that about, you know, because again, you know, coming from a world where we're constantly seeing data around how people are perceiving work and the feedback they're given an organisation, often one of the things that scores really lowly is that kind of sense of value, being valued and being recognised. And obviously that goes so much further than kind of remuneration, and it is more about kind of, you know, feeling valued for the work you do, the strengths you do, and who you are as a person. So it's really interesting to hear you talking about the impact that these types of conversations and the job crafting can have on someone feeling valued. I guess before we kind of start to talk about and move towards a final theme about introducing this into work, I guess anything like this, we want to have a kind of a rounded conversation, and it's really easy to talk about the opportunities of job crafting and all the things that sound great about job crafting and the benefits that we've seen when we have introduced it. I guess there's another side to this, isn't there, where the potential for it not to work, the potential to kind of get it wrong, and I guess I've got kind of two ways I'd like to split this. And the first one, before going to the practitioner side of getting it wrong, potentially getting it wrong, or barriers or challenges that we face, I guess I'd like to draw kind of Vicky back into the conversation here. And a lot of questions that have been coming up, Vicky, have kind of been directed towards you. And we've picked some of them up around how job crafting would work in different sectors and for different roles. And this whole thing about job crafting, we're talking about personalising the experience for individuals. Does this need to be personalised in terms of not having a one-size-fits-all approach for how we roll this out based on different job roles and based on different industries? What is the research telling us about how job crafting works for different roles and different sectors? Is there one way of doing it, or does it have to be personalised again based on the type of organisation, the type of worker?
Yeah, I mean, the research evidence to support anything I say here is really limited. So that's the caveat from that, you know, boring academic perspective, I guess. But yes, it's not one size fits all. If you start telling people do this and you'll enjoy your job more, the likelihood is they'll enjoy it less. Having said that, different types of crafting do have different results. So there is some recent research from a meta-analysis in 2019 that says using more kind of trying to find supportive resources or build better relationships can lead to improvements in well-being or in health, and can also reduce burnout at work. But if the job crafting behaviours that you engage in are to sort of reduce demands, so, you know, in a balance of demands, you need some in order to challenge yourself. Having too many can be challenging for your health and well-being. Having too few can also be challenging for health and well-being. So if you try to take out all of the things that challenge you at work, it can have negative effects on well-being or on engagement at work. So kind of, yes, different things in different scenarios, enabling individuals to identify how they would approach crafting or how they would change their job to be able to bring more of their whole self to work.
Do people realise, and for anyone in the panel, do individuals realise, you were talking about the tasks that people enjoy and the tasks that people don't enjoy. Are we potentially missing something in that people will kind of realise that they enjoy doing something when they actually are given the opportunity to do it? So, we all go through our careers and we find opportunities to kind of stretch ourselves and take on new responsibilities and new tasks, and you perhaps realize you're better at something than you thought you would, or you enjoy something more than you thought you would. So how dynamic and fluid is this in terms of always evaluating and giving people the opportunity to do things that they might not necessarily at the first point say, oh, that's a task I would love to do? Andrew, you've not kind of, I've not pulled you back into this for a while. So maybe tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced with things like that. Have you found that no one's wanted to do certain tasks, or there's been conflicts between the types of tasks people have wanted to do?
Yeah, they are real and genuine challenges. Interestingly, the real challenge we're talking about at the moment is connected to that, Ryan, but there's a bit of a dichotomy over it, because part of the challenge we've got is if you want to embed something that you believe on and you really can see the value across the organisation, then instinctively you want to put a structure around it, you want leadership to direct it, you want resource behind it, you want to make it happen. But then my big worry and my anxiety with that, as soon as you do that, it becomes one of those monolithic top-down things. And part of the challenge that Sarah described is then you're then putting pressure on managers to deliver it, to make it happen, to force it almost. And that almost sounds counterintuitive to the purpose of job crafting, where you're trying to enable people to find their own way, make their own choices and decisions. So we are trying to sort of struggle with that slight contradiction between making it happen across the organisation in a sensible, measured way without forcing it, and then putting undue pressure right across the organisation. So in a way, I think part of the challenge is that issue of conversations that Sarah talked about, having ongoing conversations, but perhaps the patience, almost let people make it happen quite tacitly in a quite low-key way, and then let it sort of filter across. And the big fear that we're finding at the moment is that some people are doing it and doing it quite well, and therefore you are building on their successes. So you've got champions across the organisations who get it. And then the work that we're doing, then are you only talking to the same population again? So how do you broaden, how do you widen? And I think our view is it just takes time. You have to be patient. You have to let people experience it and learn from it and find their own way. And certain ways are easier. So we talked earlier about the wellbeing crafting, and that's actually a relatively straightforward way of doing it. So sometimes we'd focus on that. And perhaps for some of our more low-paid staff in very functional roles, it's harder to then deal with the task crafting because of the nature of their job. But you might find a way to focus on behaviours or well-being. So you just have to adapt and develop, and perhaps not be too rigid and top-down and monolithic. But getting that balance, I think, is a bit of an ongoing challenge, and we're not there yet. But that seems to be our biggest issue at the moment, Ryan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. I guess one of the other things that I'm really interested in is from a recruitment point of view, how is job crafting potentially going to change the world of recruitment and the way in which people kind of put themselves forward for jobs, the way in which job opportunities are kind of articulated and kind of put out there? Jules, do you have kind of any experience of doing that within Virgin, or Sodexo? I know is a big organisation you've been working with recently, but you're also supporting lots of other organisations as well through the consultancy work you do. And I guess Rob can then follow on from that. Is recruitment becoming a big area in which we're looking at how we can start to introduce job crafting, and how is that perhaps going to also work alongside technology as well to change the way in which we, that aspect of work evolves in the future?
I'd say tentatively yes. I say tentatively for a couple of reasons. Tentatively, yes, because I think we're still trying to, build it and embed it within the organisation with people who are already in jobs. But I think tentatively, yes, and it definitely potential, because we talk about a personalised employee experience, a colleague experience, and that's the way the world's going. I actually think it's going to become even more like that post-pandemic era. So I think organisations who talk about and have how important it is to bring your own personal self to work, as they go out and market their jobs and make that clear. And as people then start to come on board through the recruitment process, pre-boarding and onboarding, if managers are skilled to have those almost like coaching conversations to help people shape shape their role and how they experience their new organisation. So I definitely think it has the potential. I'm not sure that I've seen it, you know, I haven't seen a lot of it, but I definitely think it does have the potential.
And that's you know, that it's going to take time for us to kind of evolve this, develop and learn from it. I guess from a recruitment perspective, I'm just wondering whether, you know, it's that if you're able to kind of pitch to the talent out there, this is what we're trying to achieve as an organization, this is our culture, and if, you know, we're really passionate about, you know, our cultures and embedding that and making sure that's super strong, and the types of individuals that can come in and really add to that and enhance that, and that's what you pitch into to the talent pool, and then they're kind of coming and telling you more about how they'll be able to add to that and contribute and complement that. I could see that as being one opportunity, but then I can also see that presenting some challenges as well. So Rob, how have you kind of seen this playing out with in the recruitment world with job crafting? Is it going to feel a little bit too fluffy to just start kind of pitching to people, you know, this is what we're about as an organization, tell us why you would be a great fit and what you could offer based on your skills?
You've seen some organisations have done this, and some organisations have actually gone as far as saying we want you just to have skills, and we haven't got a role for you yet. So basically, we're interested in talented people in a broad set of skills, and we haven't got a role, and we'll create opportunities for you to craft this. So some are looking at that extent. I'm with some of the kind of organisations that I've been working with and following and interviewing for the book. Some organisations are saying actually they want to create sticky workplaces where actually they, particularly in areas which are particularly competitive, and I know Sarah might kind of chip in with an example that they've used in terms of recruitment at Connect, where actually certain skill sets are very hard to find, and people kind of turn over quite highly because they're just so in demand. So if you create an environment in where you're saying actually we want you to personalize your approach to work, so the broad structure of your role is there, you can't change that. So if you think about like a semi-tailored suit, you've got the structure, the color, the fabric's chosen for you, but you can make small changes to it to make it a better, more comfortable fit for you. If you give that the opportunity to people when they're starting, and then they feel they have personalised their job, they're less likely. They're going to be more likely to value it in the way that I said at the start. You value these personalised things, but also you're more likely to stick around because you can be offered more money, or you can be offered more benefits. But if you're not going to be doing the things you enjoy doing, or if you don't feel you're going to get a personalised thing, you're less likely to give that up. But I'll stop there. And I just mentioned to Sarah, then if you want to kind of share anything.
I did a couple of weeks ago. I brought a group of managers together to take a bit of a reflection and review of job crafting, kind of sort of 9-10 months in. And one of the things they particularly said was actually, please keep it, because it's a massive differentiator at recruitment stage. We talk about it, we use it as a real sell, and it helps us attract people with that creative and innovative mindset that we want. So we are definitely using it as a hook into the business, and I think that's been really effective. We're also really quite open about the roles we recruit. So particularly from a clinical perspective, we mobilise lots of new services. We're quite open about the roles. We'll say, you know, this is the service, this is the kind of skill sets we're looking for. Come to us with how you think it could make it work, and that's linked really nicely to job crafting. So definitely a link to recruitment, probably more for the future, but definitely a link for now.
I guess there's the you know, we see as well through all of the engagement data which we collect for so many organisations, that there's that honeymoon period of engagement. So whenever we look at engagement levels by length of service, you always see it's highest at the point where you come in, and after a year it tends to have dropped off. And I guess maybe some of this links to that, in the sense of when you come and you have that energy and excitement when you first head into an organization, you've been told all of these things about how wonderful the culture is and how many development opportunities they're going to be and how much opportunity you're going to have to use your skills and stretch yourself. Perhaps that's where some of this kind of falls down, and that once people actually come into the organization and that's not being fulfilled, or it's not becoming a reality for them, and that's why the engagement's kind of tailing off. So perhaps individuals are coming into a role thinking that they're going to be at their best every day and they're going to be doing the things that they really enjoy, and then the reality of it is there's too much of the stuff that doesn't engage them and doesn't excite them and doesn't enable them to thrive. So there could be a potential opportunity there to do more around not just the recruitment, but through that kind of onboarding and integration. First few months in the organization being absolutely key, and if people get to do what they enjoy doing, then they're going to be able to maintain that engagement level. So it'd be interesting to collect more data, I suppose, and Vicky, you know, that academic point of view, just data back this up, because again, a lot of the questions coming through are about challenges from executive senior leadership teams around, you know, getting their true buy-in and them truly supporting this. And I guess as we start to kind of come towards a close, for me, and I was talking to Rob about this last week when we were discussing the panel, and if we look at something like remote working and flexible working, it's been something which, you know, we've talked about for so long. And I guess so many organizations have resisted it up until they've almost had their hands forced by a global pandemic. So many organizations saying, well, remote working won't really work for us, and we can't offer flexible working in these roles. It just doesn't work. And yes, it might work in that organization, but where all those kind of reasons that you hear, all of a sudden COVID-19 comes across and we're all forced to change the way in which we're working. So I guess my question to all of you as we start to come towards a close is, how do we introduce something like job crafting in a widespread way, and on a bigger scale across all of these organizations out there? How do we actually get this to start happening and to start changing the future of work without necessarily requiring another global crisis to kind of force our hand? What's going to be the key to kind of unlocking this? A big question to kind of finish on, if anyone fancies jumping on.
That is a big question.
That's going to be the key to all of this. It sounds great. We see the benefits of it when we do it. How can we actually start to introduce this on a really big scale and get more businesses, more senior leaders to take notice of it?
Do you know,
say something? Sorry, Jules, go on. No, you go, Jules.
Well, it's really topical because Rob and I were talking about this yesterday, and I can't help but think the short to medium term is going to be full of ambiguity. Work is going to be, there's going to be a lack of clarity. So where there's that level of ambiguity and a lack of clarity, then people are going to have been contemplating as well the impact and meaning and the purpose of the work that I do. So I think there's almost a burning platform. There's an opportunity for us to, or for job crafting to really make an impact, because we are going to be asking people to be thinking about their jobs, what they do, how they do. And I definitely think there's an opportunity for purpose crafting, which was a conversation that Rob and I had yesterday, because where there's ambiguity, where there's a lack of clarity in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis, then we need to be connecting people to their work and giving them a purpose and helping them understand the meaning and impact of what they do. So I can't help but think that this actually just gives us that real burning platform to go out there and get people thinking bottom up. We're empowering people, because actually senior leadership haven't got all the answers. So actually to go bottom up now, it is a perfect opportunity to do it.
Yeah, so perhaps there is opportunity in the fact that we are having to flex so much at the moment. It's to almost kind of like ride and jump on that. And
I agree completely with Jules. And I think the trick is to capture those really good stories of where it's happened.
Yeah.
Because it's happening all the time now, whether we like it or not, because of the crisis we're in. And I feel now my role is to capture them, you know, note them, log them, and share them. You know, share them with the senior team, share them with managers. You don't necessarily have to call it here's job crafting, but it's a really good example of that bottom up, of that creative, different way of thinking and working. And I think that kind of storytelling will really have a long-term impact.
Great. Sarah, you've popped something in there in the chat box there around execs and actually getting them to craft their own roles. Tell us a little bit more about that, because if you experience it and love it yourself, you're more likely to replicate it on you across others.
And I think, you know, like most organisations, the focus from exec is, well, that sounds great, but actually we need to focus on performance, and of course we do. But getting our executive team to think about job crafting for themselves in the first instance, and think as a team about their responsibilities, what their strengths, and reshape themselves as a group, was a really good way of getting buy-in at the very start, and a really good story to tell the business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I add something there, Ryan? Sorry, we've been talking about this in my workplace, about the kind of stop, start, continue model, you know, and whether that might help. So what are we doing now that works for us? Asking people to capture those stories now, so that it's not a sort of, we're back into work now, oh no, it's really scary and we don't know what we're going to do. The leaders need to take control and tell everyone what to do. It's kind of how we can, I think the key is going to be how we handle the transition back to work rather than what we're doing now, because it's really easy to just revert to typical behaviours, isn't it, or what we think we're supposed to be doing because we're nervous about the future.
I think we've seen so much increase in trust.
Exactly.
I think at the start of all of this, there is that relinquishing of control and having to trust your people a lot more. And we've shown that actually, if you trust your people, they will deliver more than you thought was ever humanly possible at the minute. So let's not lose that when we get back to the office.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I just ask then, in terms of people identifying their strengths and what they enjoy, I guess anyone kind of listening in on this, either live or the recorded version, will be familiar with this kind of idea and this challenge we have, that a lot of people managers out there are fantastic technically, but they're perhaps not naturally kind of inclined to do the softer side of things. Perhaps the softer skills are things that they don't currently have, or the part of their role which they don't feel as comfortable with. So I guess my question is job crafting going to help influence who those kind of future managers and leaders are, because we'll be able to pick up earlier the people who are going to have more of a authentic appetite to lead people? Andrew, I'll put that to you before I go to Rob.
I'm sure that is the case, and I don't doubt whatsoever, Ryan, that when we think about leaders and potential managers, that breadth of skills and having that broader range of ability to have those more nuanced, more subtle conversations with staff, and also trust staff to enable them to thrive and flourish rather than just demand the technical delivery. That breadth of skill and technique, I think, probably will be a key feature for the future. And the task that we've got is, how do we recognise that? How do we support that and enable that? But so I'm sure you're right. Quite how we do it, that's tough, and we have to do more thought and reflection on that. Yeah. But I don't doubt that that's a key underpinning skill that we need more of, actually.
And another part maybe to consider with that will be that, you want people to kind of really enjoy that aspect of management and leadership. But I guess kind of linking this to remuneration, which will always be important, particularly with the kind of economical pressures we're going to face and have been faced even before the crisis. You don't want people to feel like they need to put themselves forward as having that desire to lead and manage people just because they see that as being the only way to earn more money. So I don't know if that's going to be another kind of dynamic to this when we start thinking about that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side to that is to enable managers who perhaps struggle a bit with this sort of, as you described, sort of the softer skills, the engagement skills. It's recognising that's fine too. So we can still have a really important role for those technical managers and enable them to progress. And what we have to do is enable them to craft their roles so they're not line managing and supporting large groups of staff, and they're just not enjoying it. They're not really engaging in that. So we can actually develop and change their roles to accommodate that. And we're doing a little bit of that at the moment. So it's sort of recognising actually the breadth of skills and abilities. And there's nothing wrong with people not being very comfortable or happy with that kind of skill set.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to have to come back together kind of a few months down the line, and because a lot of this, it's kind of like we're learning as we're going about this. And I guess, Rob, as we reach the kind of close of this, I'd like to come to you as the author of this book that's kind of stimulating so many great conversations around this. And you've contributed to this, but you also have heard and seen some of the heard from the panel and their experiences, seeing some of the questions come through. I guess if you can help us kind of close this by what would your advice and your guidance be to the people who have had their curiosity piqued over the past hour? How do they go about taking this further? What would be your kind of golden nugget to them in terms of how they can learn more about job crafting and learn more about how they can introduce it inside their businesses?
Well, first of all, they can obviously buy the book, very reasonably priced at Amazon, so Personalisation at Work. But thanks, Jules, thank you. But in all seriousness, I think the key thing is around actually understanding, experimenting with yourself in this first instance, or actually exploring how have you crafted your job, how do you job craft currently, without maybe even realising you were doing it before this call. And maybe even next week, just think about one aspect of what you're doing and being deliberate in terms of changing it ever so slightly. So it may be in terms of the tasks you do, it may be your well-being. And we're all forced to do this in the current work environment. This is happening to us all the time, but do it deliberately and reflect on how that's working. And if you're a manager, why don't you just invite a conversation with your colleague in terms of saying, how could you make your current working circumstances, how can you make your current job a little bit better? If you could improve it by 1%, what would you do? And just stand back from that and hear what that person says, and then give them all the encouragement you can to just see if they can make that 1% change and see how it and build from there. So don't think big, don't think big bang. Start small and iterative, and
kind of marginal gains type
absolutely,
approach.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that might make it feel a little bit easier to kind of approach and to start those conversations rather than, like you said, big bang. Which
and I think just giving the people that sense of control and that sense of purpose in terms of what they're doing can help support and amplify and boost the well-being, which we're kind of seeing as well. So it's in terms of, rather than just feeling carried away by your circumstances, carried away by your job, it's around actually taking a little bit of control into what you're doing to make it a bit better for you as an individual.